high temperatures this summer, in part due to climate change, in part due to the El Niño warming.
This is Reuters.
Oh my gosh, look at the harbor. Oh my gosh.
It's Hawaii's worst natural disaster in history, according to officials, who say Maui's wildfires unleashed destruction that will take many years and billions of dollars to rebuild. The resort town of Lahaina was once the capital of the Hawaiian kingdom, drawing 80% of the island's visitors every year. Much of it has now been reduced to smoldering ruins, according to Governor Josh Green. The fast-moving inferno killed more than 50 people, a toll expected to rise, turned thousands homeless, and destroyed as many as 1,000 buildings. This tourist from California was on vacation with his wife and 5 children as the fire approached. They were forced to jump into the sea after escaping their rental car in Lahaina.
Everything we're out there floating, and this is so surreal, and everything was burning around, explosions, cars blowing up, like embers flying. We couldn't breathe. We couldn't breathe. There's no air. It's just the carbon monoxide, and we held on as best as we could. My wife, my kids, my older ones helped with the younger ones, and we tried to stick out together. The waves was trying to take us out to the ocean. We had to come back.
Many more people suffered burns, smoke inhalation, and other injuries. The inferno that ravaged Lahaina was one of 3 major wildfires on Maui, all of them still burning. Fueled by dry conditions, a buildup of fuel, and 60 miles per hour gusts of wind. The fate of some of Lahaina's cultural treasures remains unclear. The historic 60-foot-tall banyan tree marking the spot where a 19th century palace stood is still standing, though some of its boughs appeared charred.
Wildfires scorching Hawaii's Maui and Big Islands have killed dozens of people, left behind smoldering ruins, and forced thousands of residents and tourists to flee. On Friday, the state's governor called it the worst natural disaster to ever hit Hawaii. But how did these fires become so devastating? The cause of the blazes was still not clear days after they began. The fires have hit large parts of Lahaina, a beach resort city of about 13,000 people on northwestern Maui, especially hard. It sits in the relative middle of the 8 main islands that make up Hawaii's archipelago. What experts do know is that conditions were ripe for wildfires there before they sparked off on Tuesday.
Maui was in a D1, D2 severe drought for the season, and the risk for large fire potential was higher there than it was in California.
That's San Jose State University meteorology professor Craig Clements. The National Weather Service had also issued warnings for the Hawaiian Islands for high winds and dry weather. Add to that the unusually high temperatures this summer, in part due to climate change, in part due to the El Niño warming event.
So these conditions all lined up with kind of a classic fire weather situation. It just so happened that there was ignition during the high wind event, allowing a very fast spreading fire to burn into the community towards the coast.
U.S. weather officials say winds from Hurricane Dora have fanned the flames across the U.S. state. coming from hundreds of miles southwest of the Hawaiian Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Separately, a low-pressure system to the west near Japan has also contributed to sustained high winds. These all become a serious problem when they reach Maui's very steep mountain range.
The winds were coming from the northeast, and they were very strong winds. They were descending, going up and over the mountain range and descending what we call the lee side. And when that happens, you get acceleration near the surface. And so you get actually faster winds on the downslope side or the lee side of the mountain range.
Dry vegetation is also a contributing factor. Here's Oregon State University professor Erica Fleischman. She's also the director of the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute.
You can think of it as plants being thirstier, so plants use more water when the air temperature is higher. So the water that is present tends to disappear more rapidly.
Fueling that problem, the spread of flammable, non-native grasses brought in from around the world in areas of former farmland and forest. That's created large amounts of small, easily ignited materials that increase the risk and severity of fire. But what about the next big fire? Hawaiian officials say it will take several years and billions of dollars to rebuild the damage wrought by these fires. But scientists say human-caused climate change, driven by fossil fuel use, is increasing the frequency and intensity of such extreme weather events. Fleischman, the Oregon State professor, says there are ways to limit the risks to homes and buildings, though it's not always easy or cheap.
So many structures ignite because sparks moving far in front of the fire front get into the ventilation system of the building. And there are ways to construct buildings so that the ventilation systems, it's less easy for the ventilation systems to take up sparks. You can have fire-resistant roofs. You can be doing different things with decks, with materials next to structures. So, there are possibilities for saying a wildfire is likely to happen in the future, but perhaps buildings don't burn down. Perhaps people can protect themselves better from smoke or have better alert networks, evacuation networks. All kinds of systems to say if we accept as a society that these events will happen again, how can we best protect ourselves and the things we care about from those events?
As wildfires scorched their way through Hawaii's Maui Island this week, killing dozens and forcing thousands to flee, some wondered whether artificial intelligence could have helped minimize the damage. In California, firefighters are experimenting with AI to see if it can do just that, setting up more than 1,000 cameras across the state that feed images into a machine that alerts first responders about when to mobilize. Suzanne Leininger is an intelligence specialist at CAL FIRE.
So our mission is to keep all wildland fires 10 acres or less. So these AI cameras will help us get out there faster to keep up with that mission.
The Alert California pilot program began last month, but has already started to show results. A camera spotted a fire that broke out at 3 a.m. in the remote Cleveland National Forest about 50 miles east of San Diego. In the dark, it could have spread into a raging wildfire, but the AI-powered program alerted a fire captain who called in crews that put it out in 45 minutes.
If a detection is automatically happening, then that's what can be really helpful to us because it's basically patrolling 24/7.
Leininger says the technology could one day serve as a model for other states and countries.
I think it's 100% applicable throughout anywhere in the world, especially now that we're experiencing a lot larger and more frequent fire regimes. And with climate change, it's coming everywhere.
The AI system was designed by engineers at the University of California, San Diego, using AI from Digital Path, a company based in Chico, California.
Russia launched its first moon landing spacecraft in 47 years on Friday. In doing so, it's joined the race to become the first nation to make a soft landing on the lunar South Pole. That's a region believed by scientists at NASA and other space agencies to hold coveted pockets of water ice in its shadowed craters. Rough terrain makes landing there difficult, but the prize of discovering water ice could be historic. The Russian mission is competing against India, which launched its own lunar lander last month.
+5 seconds.
It's also up against China and the United States, which also have advanced exploration programs. A Soyuz 2.1 rocket carrying the Luna 25 craft blasted off from the Vostochny cosmodrome before being boosted out of Earth's orbit toward the moon over an hour later. It's expected to touch down on the moon later this month. There's much riding on this mission. The Kremlin says the West's sanctions over the Ukraine war, many of which have targeted Moscow's aerospace sector, have failed to cripple the Russian economy. But the moonshot will test the nation's growing independence in space. Its invasion of Ukraine has severed nearly all of Moscow's space ties with the West, beside its integral role on the International Space Station. The European Space Agency had planned to test its Pilot D navigation camera by attaching it to Luna 25, but also cut ties with the project after Russia invaded Ukraine. For centuries, astronomers have wondered about water on the moon, which is 100 times drier than the Sahara. Although major powers have all been probing it in recent years, no country has yet made a soft landing on the South Pole.
What's driving the new race to the moon? Major powers like the US, China, Japan, and the EU have all been probing the moon over recent years. A Japanese lunar landing failed last year, and an Israeli mission failed in 2019. There's been a focus on the South Pole, where no country has been able to reach yet. Rough terrain makes landing difficult, but the prize could be historic. Ice that could be used to extract fuel, oxygen, and drinking water. Russia and India are racing to get there first.
Yeah, Russia's aspirations towards the moon are mixed up in a lot of different things. I think
Asif Siddiqui is a professor of history at Fordham University.
There's always been speculation that there's water on the moon, and that's important if you want to build permanent settlements on the moon. So I think what Russia is trying to do is really spearhead that investigation and be at the forefront of it. So the fact that they're exploring the South Pole isn't an accident.
Astronomers have wondered about water on the moon for centuries, which is 100 times drier than the Sahara Desert. It was only in 2020 that NASA confirmed the existence of water there. India sent up its Chandrayaan-3 lunar lander last month after the Chandrayaan-2 failed in 2019. But Russia may also have political ambitions behind its space missions, especially as it faces sanctions from the West over the war in Ukraine.
First and foremost, it's an expression of national power on the global stage. Russia wants to go to the moon, partly to assert its national place with the big guys, so to speak. China has already announced plans to return humans to the moon. The US has a major program called Artemis that it is in the middle of. So there's a lot of activity going on. Russia, because it lacks the economic power of the United States, has allied with China. So it's possible that what the Chinese do, the Russians may actually piggyback on top of that in the next 10, 15 years.
West African nations on Friday worked on plans for a possible military intervention in Niger. The regional bloc also pledged to enforce sanctions, travel bans and asset freezes on the junta which ousted former President Mohamed Bazoum on July 26. After a summit of its heads of state, ECOWAS ordered the activation of a standby force for possible use against the junta. It said it had not given up hope of a peaceful resolution to the crisis, but that all options, including military action, were possible. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu.
And you will see from the communique of this extraordinary summit that no option is taken off the table, including the use of force as a last resort.
It is not clear how big the force would be, if it would actually invade, and which countries would contribute. Security analysts said ECOWAS force could take weeks or longer to assemble, potentially leaving room for negotiations. The junta has said it would defend the country against any foreign attack. Director of Strategic Stabilization Advisors, Annelise Bernard, spoke to Reuters from California.
So there's still a lot of unknowns, but this is a significant next step and certainly an escalation of tensions, at least, between the regional bloc and the junta bloc that seems to be forming right now, between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger specifically.
In the capital, Niamey, residents condemned the military intervention plan.
This is an act of aggression, and we call on the legitimate authorities, the members of the CNSP, to consider it an act of war, an act of aggression, and to respond with force.
ECOWAS needs to understand what the people of the various member countries expect of it. What is expected of ECOWAS is to attack the causes of coup d'etat, not the consequences.
The European Union and the United States reiterated concern about the conditions under which Bazoum and his family were being detained. Uranium-rich Niger is a key ally for the West in the fight against Islamist militants in the Sahel region. Until the coup, it was also aligned with the West after neighboring Mali, and others turned against former colonial power France in favor of closer ties with Russia. France said late on Thursday it fully backed all the conclusions of ECOWAS meeting, but it stayed clear of outlining any concrete support it could give to any potential intervention.
The one dead suspect and 6 others arrested in the assassination of Ecuadorian presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio were from Colombia. That's according to Ecuadorian police on Thursday. Villavicencio, a former lawmaker and journalist, was shot dead in the capital Quito on Wednesday during a campaign event, less than 2 weeks before the election. The Interior Minister Juan Zapata said police seized a variety of weapons during a raid that led to the arrests.
During the raids, we found a rifle, a submachine gun, 4 pistols, 3 grenades, 4 boxes of ammunition, 2 motorbikes, and a vehicle reported stolen.
The government also said it was pursuing the intellectual authors of the murder. This video of the arrests was released on Thursday by the country's police. The murder has sent shockwaves through Ecuador, with many citizens saying they live in fear. They have seen a surge in violence in recent years. Drug cartels and organized crime have been a looming problem. The nation's defense minister said troops have been deployed throughout the country and will remain there until the election is over, adding, quote, "The vote of Ecuadorians will be the best response to the mafias and their allies." Electoral officials also urged voters to turn out and cast their ballot on August 20th, saying authorities will make sure the polls are safe. Meanwhile, on Thursday, people gathered to protest the killing outside a cemetery where a vigil for Villavicencio was being held. There were also demonstrations elsewhere in the capital city, demanding justice for the slain politician. Several rival candidates suspended their campaigns after his death.
I think they wanted to wait us out. They wanted to starve us out. And I think they wanted us to be broken.
Hollywood writers marked 100 days of striking on Wednesday, with contract talks stalled and people on the picket lines still protesting what they describe as a disregard for their demands. The 100-day mark means this strike has now lasted longer than the writers' strike of 2007 to 2008. And the feeling among protesters is decidedly different this time around, says writer Ian Deachman.
I am so blown away by the solidarity that I feel out here and the strength. And I hope that the companies are starting to realize that, like, the longer they make us walk in the heat, the angrier we get and the stronger we get, not the weaker.
The strike began on May 2nd, after negotiations between the Writers Guild of America and major studios reached an impasse over issues including compensation, minimum staffing levels, and residual payments in the streaming era. Writers also sought to regulate the use of artificial intelligence, which they fear could replace their creative input. Picketers outside Netflix said they were undeterred by the length of the strike. This is Celia Finkelstein.
You you can't break people who have already chosen a job where we're told no 500 times a day. We chose a hard job because we're resilient and because we love it.
Entertainment industry executives have been trying to navigate the cross-currents of declining television revenues, a movie box office that has yet to return to pre-COVID levels, and streaming businesses that are struggling to turn a profit. Actors represented by the Screen Actors Guild also went on strike on July 14th, also over pay and artificial intelligence, effectively halting production of scripted television shows and films. It is the first time both unions have gone on strike since 1960. Evan Shafran is a SAG-AFTRA member and MC at Netflix.
We believe so much in fair pay and fair contracts and not being exploited by these companies.
A meeting last week to discuss resuming talks between the Writers Guild of America and the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, the group representing the major studios in negotiations, resulted in no firm date for returning to the bargaining table. The WGA did not respond to requests for comment for this story, and the AMPTP declined comment.
Cheers! Our plan is working. It's working.
Once there was Reaganomics. Now America's current president has an economic doctrine all his own. But what exactly is Bidenomics? The man himself has a definition.
First, making smart investments in America. Second, educating and empowering American workers to grow the middle class. And third, promoting competition to lower costs to help small businesses.
It's a contrast to the policies of 1980s President Ronald Reagan. He saw tax cuts as the key to wealth creation.
To reduce the enormous burden of federal taxation.
Instead, Biden wants to tax the wealthy more to fund investment.
Bidenomics is about building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down.
He aims to funnel money to priority areas like chip making, clean energy, and electric cars. That's meant to revive manufacturing and put U.S. workers first.
Workers aren't just finding more jobs, they're able to look for better jobs at higher pay.
So, is it working? It's too early to say for sure. White House aides say public deficits could get worse before they get better. And while inflation has come down, it remains high by recent standards. But Biden says growth rates lead the developed world. And he claims huge success on job creation.
We created over 13 million brand new jobs since I took office. 13 million in less than 3 years.
As for what voters make of it, not much, so far at least. Polls show 60% of Americans disapprove of Biden's performance on inflation. Their final verdict could come at next year's presidential election.
Has the government asked you to cooperate with their investigation? What were the issues with local council today? Out of the road, out of the road, out of the road. Out of the road, come on. Thank you.
The Ukrainian government has announced that it plans to create what it's calling a humanitarian corridor in the Black Sea that would allow cargo ships that have been stuck in its ports since the onset of Russia's full-scale invasion to finally leave. This footage from Ukraine's military is said to show an attack in early August on one port, but industry sources say it's unlikely many shipping companies will participate in Ukraine's new plan due to safety fears. And could be a major test of Ukraine's ability to reopen sea lanes, particularly after the grain deal it had with Russia was abandoned last month. This was one of the last ships to leave port before the grain deal's collapse. Russia has been trying to reimpose its control of the sea ever since and had no immediate comment on Ukraine's announcement. Sources in shipping and insurance familiar with Ukraine say they weren't informed about the corridor, and there are questions over its viability. They say it's unlikely many ships will agree to set sail. About 60 commercial ships have been stuck in port since Russia's invasion, and many of the ships' crews have already been evacuated.
The Ukrainian Navy said in a written statement that its proposed sea routes to the United Nations shipping regulators, and a spokesperson told Reuters that it will put cameras on ships to show it's purely a humanitarian mission. A UN spokesperson said it hoped to resume safe shipping as it was under the grain deal.
In Vladimir Putin's Russia, the Kremlin even writes the history textbooks. These books enter schools next month and give a completely revised interpretation of history. They reflect Putin's historical view, pride at the achievements of the superpower Soviet Union, indignation at the humiliations of the Soviet collapse, and a claim for the rebirth of Russia when Putin took over in 1999. The 4 textbooks for 16 to 18-year-old schoolchildren were published by Kremlin aide Vladimir Medinsky. The final chapter focuses on the Ukraine war, which Moscow calls the special military operation. It describes how the West became, quote, fixated on destabilizing Russia and dismembering it to grab its resources. Mikhail Kopitska is a Russian history teacher who left after the invasion of Ukraine and now teaches in Montenegro.
From what I've seen, this is a propaganda text. It's not a textbook, not a school book. I'm talking first and foremost about the paragraphs and pages dedicated to the so-called special military operation. It is 100% not study material, and it is written accordingly. It's not questions and tasks aimed at forming skills and knowledge. They are very clearly and blatantly aimed at forming a certain pre-decided point of view and pre-decided interpretation of events.
Предписанный образ такой вот, предписанную трактовку событий.
Russia currently controls a little under 1/5 of Ukraine, which has sought to rewrite its own history and purge much of its Soviet and Tsarist past. Explicitly endorsed histories have for millennia been used by the powerful to influence their own legacies. The West's attempt to punish Russia over Ukraine has failed, the book says, but it says Russian assets totaling over $1 trillion were stolen in the West. It ends with biographies of some of the Russians who've fallen in the Ukraine war, which it doesn't call a war.
Later this month, millions of Zimbabweans will head to the polls. Some, like Tinotenda Manditsa, who is 25 and unemployed, will vote for the very first time. He belongs to a vast generation of young Zimbabweans that have only ever known economic chaos, rocketing prices, and a country on the brink of infrastructural collapse. Although a dozen candidates are vying for the presidential top spot, the main contest is between incumbent Emmerson Mnangagwa of the long-time ruling ZANU-PF party and Nelson Chamisa of the New Citizens Coalition for Change. They're going all out to woo younger voters, blasting out hugely popular dancehall music at campaign rallies, posting social media videos of pop stars and sporting heroes, and fielding younger candidates in parliamentary and council contests. All in an effort to win over a generation of voters who were just children when longtime ruler Robert Mugabe was ousted 6 years ago. But Tinotenda, who ekes out a living selling his mother's handmade wares, isn't convinced change will happen.
I'm appealing to the authorities to hear our cries and address our concerns. As young people, our cries are not being heard. We do not have jobs.
3/4 of the country's population is under 34, and 1/6 of the registered electorate are first-time voters. Elections watchdog officer Brighton Tamberekera believes their vote will determine the outcome, provided it's free and fair.
But what we know is that in the voters roll, there are about close to 1 million voters who are going to vote for the first time. Because we are talking of 1 million new voters who have been ushered into a closely contested election. So there's a high probability that this election will be decided by the first-time voters.
Incumbent Mnangagwa has promised to extend economic opportunities to the youth in sectors such as agriculture and mining, while Chamisa has promised to create youth jobs by boosting the informal sector.
From why WeWork may not work much longer to whiplash for Italian banks, this is the week in numbers. 38.5% was the plunge in shares for WeWork on Wednesday. The company's market value was almost wiped out after it warned it could go bankrupt. It's a stunning reversal for a firm valued at $47 billion just a few years ago. WeWork has faced management turmoil and declining demand for its shared office spaces. $13.99 is the new price for ad-free streaming on Disney Plus in the US. That's a 27% jump on the previous monthly fee. Disney is ramping up charges and cutting costs as it tries to make streaming profitable. 40% was the new windfall tax on Italian banks this year. The unexpected move sparked a plunge in shares for big lenders there. But banks then bounced back a day later when ministers hurried to water down the measure, leaving investors relieved but also a bit confused. 0.3% was the decline in consumer prices in China in July. That fueled talk that the country is sliding into deflation and ramped up pressure on Beijing to do something. Investors have so far been underwhelmed by vague promises of more stimulus. And just over $32 billion was the latest quarterly revenue number at Alibaba. That marked its strongest pace of growth in almost 2 years, defying worries that the e-commerce titan would be dragged down by China's sputtering economy.
The owners of luxury brands Coach and Michael Kors have agreed to merge in a multi-billion-dollar deal, creating a U.S. fashion powerhouse that will challenge its larger European rivals. Coach parent Tapestry, which also owns popular fashion brands Kate Spade and Stuart Weitzman, announced Thursday that it will buy Kors parent Capri, whose other high-end labels include Jimmy Choo and Versace. Total price tag, $8.5 billion. Together, the two companies generated more than $12 billion in annual sales, according to Tapestry. By comparison, European rival LVMH generated $87 billion. U.S. luxury firms have consistently lagged their European peers in scale, limiting their ability to compete better. LVMH owns 75 brands, including U.S. jeweler Tiffany and fashion labels Louis Vuitton and Dior. The deal is also a bulwark against a looming slowdown in demand for luxury goods in the U.S., as sticky inflation forces customers to cut back on discretionary spending. Analysts said it may also help Capri revive sales at Michael Kors, which have lagged the past few quarters. Under the financial terms, Tapestry will pay Capri shareholders $57 per share, a premium of nearly 65%. Shares of Capri soared more than 56% in Thursday morning trading. Shares of Tapestry were down nearly 14%.
Being a companion, lifting up heavy loads, helping with physical therapy, the duties of caregivers may soon be helped or replaced by robots. In a world where humans are facing a rising demand for healthcare services and the supply of caregivers is falling short, how could robots play a bigger role in helping older people?
I believe that robots can be a great asset in providing care and assistance to vulnerable people.
At a conference organized by the International Telecommunication Union in Geneva, robot expert Nadia Magnanet-Thalmann told Reuters that AI-powered robots like Nadine could play a future role as companions in care homes.
It's great to meet you two. How can I help you?
This is a social robot equipped with human-like gestures and expressions. Thalmann said Nadine and robots like her can be on hand 24 hours a day.
I worked as a companion in the elderly home Brighto in Singapore during 2020. My role was to interact with elderly on their demands and play a bingo with them. It was a great experience and I enjoyed interacting with the elderly and helping them with their needs.
In China, an entrepreneur hopes robots can cope with the world's aging population. According to UN reports, the global population over 65 is projected to increase from 10% in 2022 to 16% in 2050. As the global demand for nurses and carers heats up, some countries see a staffing crisis in care homes. But Zen Ko, the co-founder and global CEO of Fourier Intelligence, thinks humanoid robots could one day ease the shortage.
And as we age, the elderly require more, support. So there are lack of clinicians and caregivers. So we are creating technologies to help to actually provide services and treatments and care for elderly.
Although the robot is still in the research and development phase, Ko hopes a working prototype could be ready in 2 to 3 years. He hopes one day humanoid robots can carry patients from their bed to wheelchairs or help pick up objects.
If I'm lifting a heavy box and I want the robot to carry it for me.
In the future, robots may be able to do all your heavy lifting. Scientists from the Italian Institute of Technology are developing a new humanoid robot called ErgoCub. It's designed for ergonomic interaction with humans and efficient locomotion. Developers say they're working to make it strong and robust enough to take on physically demanding tasks. That means robots may soon take on laborious tasks in workplaces for their aging human counterparts.
From the sensory point of view, the robot has also enhanced 3D vision. There's more sensors. It's also tactile equipped, so it can manipulate objects and feels the contact with the world physically. Again, we're planning for stronger machines, more dynamics, more powerful motors, because indeed we need robots to help us.
California has just put itself at the center of the race for self-driving cars. On Thursday, a state agency gave the green light to Alphabet's Waymo and GM's Cruise to expand their self-driving taxi services throughout San Francisco and to operate at all hours of the day, putting them in direct competition with local companies Uber and Lyft for paid taxi rides. The California Public Utilities Commission voted on Thursday 3-1 in favor of the two companies, which have been offering limited services restricted by times and geographic areas. State regulators sided with the companies in the face of a contentious 6-hour public hearing. Transportation and safety agencies, such as the police and fire departments, as well as many residents, had opposed the idea, voicing concerns about erratic driving and interference with their operations. Those in favor of the expansion, technologists and other residents, argued self-driving cars offer a safer alternative to human drivers and bring jobs and attention to a city in desperate need of a financial lift. On approving the expansion, the commission on Thursday set out some guidelines. Waymo will be permitted to drive at speeds up to 65 miles per hour and in inclement weather, while Cruise will be limited to 35 miles per hour and will not be allowed to drive when weather does not permit. While the vote takes effect immediately, neither company indicated on Thursday how soon they may roll out any round-the-clock taxi services, but they promised to do so soon in promotional emails after the vote. San Francisco is already one of the world's biggest test labs for self-driving cars. The companies had said real-world testing in dense city environments is essential to perfecting the technology.
Doctor, you're right, doctor, you're right. And that beautiful smile.
I want you to know that I'm honored, that I'm absolutely astonished. I never, ever, ever thought of anything like this. I never even thought about it. I'm really kind of dumbfounded. And I want you to know from the very bottom of my heart, I thank you. I thank you. I thank you!
The future of the Florida Keys is hotter, wilder, and saltier. Sea levels are rising at an alarming rate. Homes are under increasing threat of flooding. And the area's vulnerability with its low-lying ecosystem is becoming greater each year.
Will we be able to keep up? That's the question. You can see all the devastation here.
Scientist Chris Berg lives on the Florida Keys island of Big Pine Key, where he says the effects of the rising tide are evident. Its namesake, Big Pines, are dying off as saltwater moves in.
I mean, I've been living in this house for 20 years. I walk my dogs out from the high ground here out to the edge of the ocean. And you can see the pine trees dead. You can see them dying. You can see the mangroves moving in.
According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, sea levels along the Florida coast have gone up 8 inches since 1950. Some estimates put that figure over 50 by 2070.
So right now, the sea is rising faster than it has for thousands of years. And it is only expected to get worse unless we get our greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, and the other things that cause climate change under control.
In July, the surface ocean temperature around the Florida Keys hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about as hot as a hot tub. NOAA says that temperatures like that could supercharge tropical storms and hurricanes, as experts warn that the growing frequency and intensity of severe weather, both on land and in oceans, is a symptom of global, human-driven climate change that's fueling extremes.
The corals are kind of our canary in the coal mine.
Here's Florida Keys marine sanctuary biologist Lindsay Cruz.
When we use fossil fuels like coal, oil, and methane to drive our cars and power our homes and to do the things that we do, we increase the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So imagine you're outside in the Florida summer in a comforter. That's kind of what it's like right now with that extra carbon dioxide. And that creates warmer temperatures. And so warmer temperatures warm up the ocean. It causes things like coral bleaching. It causes the ocean to expand and increase in size, causing sea level rise. It causes ice caps to melt. It can produce stronger hurricanes. So a warmer ocean can actually affect a lot of things in our Earth's climate system.
There are efforts to mitigate the changes. Shorelines are being stabilized and buildings are getting propped up. Still, Berg worries it may not be enough.
It's like watching, an ecosystem evolve and fast forward. It's something that we've never experienced as scientists, as people. We evolved on this planet, for thousands of years with a much, much more stable climate.
Okay, now with your head like that, look at me.
When you float, your house is flooded or you're in the downwind of some forest fire, or you kind of go, wait a minute, I will think about how I drive, how I insulate my house. So those are the changes that are important. So, am I optimistic? I thought when I started this that we'd just get it going, and in 5-10 years' time there was a path to fix it. And I'm, 23 years later, I'm still banging on the drum, going, you've got to wake up, get moving. So that's frustrating, beyond frustrating, especially since the technology has moved along so fast, and people's attitude have moved along so fast. So I'm now going to hand over to the young ones, I think, and let them deal with the problem. But we've caused the problem, we've got to find the solutions.
This year and this summer in particular, the summer of 2023, it must be a turning point for European climate catastrophe action. It must be a moment where our leaders step up to protect people here and now and to protect also people from tomorrow's catastrophes. We demand European leaders to wake up in the light of this crisis.
The EU has expressed its solidarity with Slovenia. They have offered funds, but a crucial part is missing. In order to prevent further and even worse extreme weather events, we need intense, comprehensive system change and action coming from the EU. The EU needs to lead a just ecological transition that will lead us to a future where people won't have to rely on luck to avoid or their amount of resources to avoid climate catastrophe.
A Kenyan court ruled on Thursday that the alleged leader of a doomsday cult, Paul Mackenzie, be detained for another 47 days in jail. The prosecution told the court it needed more time to conclude its investigation. This is possibly the longest pre-charge detention since the promulgation of Kenya's 2010 constitution, according to the magistrate. The 50-year-old former taxi driver has been accused of ordering his followers to starve themselves to death. Sources say he told his adherents the world was going to end on April 15 and Satan would rule for 1,000 years. His cult became the focus of national horror with the discovery of more than 100 bodies, mostly children, in mass graves in the Shakahola forest of southeast Kenya. From court records and interviews with relatives of the victims, medical workers, and a police investigator, Reuters has pieced together a comprehensive picture of Mackenzie and his cult. Mackenzie grew up in rural Kwale County in southern eastern Kenya. In the early 1990s, he moved to the coastal town of Malindi, where he worked as a taxi driver. Fellow driver Japheth Charo said Mackenzie became increasingly focused on religion and started his own church in 2003. Charo said he and his family joined the church for 2 years until Mackenzie's sermons became alarming.
We had been there for about 2 years. Soon he started verbally attacking other religions like Muslims and Catholics.
So kuongea maneno ambayo sasa ikawa ni kama inapiga wale watu kimaneno yani.
In March 2017, police searched Mackenzie's compound in Malindi and found 43 children living there without attending school. That's according to court documents at the time. Mackenzie's brother says the cult leader believed education was evil.
Yeye nakwambia yeye kivyake yeye alisema mimi watoto wangu hawataenda kwa sababu ya hii.
As an individual, he said he wouldn't take his own children to school because of various reasons. He said worldly education does not help anyone, but when you give a child godly education, they are safe, not just on earth but in heaven as well. And he said that he will give his children religious education.
Kwa hivyo yeye watoto wake alisema yeye watoto wake atawafundisha mambo ya dini.
In 2019, the authorities ordered his church to shut down. That's when Mackenzie relocated to the Shakahola forest, home to his Good News International church. There, he lived with hundreds of his followers in makeshift homes of polythene sheeting and thatch. Stephen Mwiti says his wife joined the cult 2 years ago.
My wife told me she'd found a church that would take her to heaven. She said it was wrong to go to school and hospital. I challenged her and told her that she had gone to school. I asked her how she would have read the Bible if she hadn't been to school.
Mwiti fears his wife and 6 children died in the mass starvation. Mackenzie told his adherents the world as they knew it was going to end on April 15 and ordered them to starve themselves and their children to death so that they could meet Jesus in heaven. That's according to relatives of his followers. Rebecca Mbetsa, the mother of 31-year-old Mercy Chai, searched for her daughter's remains at the hospital mortuary in Malindi.
There was a time she got ill and she refused to go to hospital, saying her faith did not allow her to.
Mackenzie planned the mass starvation of cult members in 3 phases. First children, then women and young men, and finally the remaining man and he himself. That's according to 6 of the people, including the investigator. The investigator also said Mackenzie denied that he told anyone not to eat, adding that the cult leader said he himself had been eating. Sudan's conflict, which began mid-April, has pushed the country's education system into a state of collapse. Many schools have either shut down or been repurposed to host displaced people. Now in Chad, Sudanese medical student Arafa Ibrahim says she's back to point zero.
I started university in 2017 and I did not graduate until now because of the problems in Al Janina. Last thing, they destroyed the university and destroyed us as well. We don't have a future now. We are now back to point zero, as if we have not studied anything at all.
The conflict has brought daily battles to the streets of Khartoum and the displacement of more than 4 million people within Sudan and across its borders. According to the United Nations, at least 89 schools across 7 states are being used as shelters, raising fears that many children will not have access to education and could be exposed to child labour and abuse. Arif Noor is Sudan's country director for Save the Children.
There have been reports of children being recruited by different armed actors, and we have also have had reports of sexual abuse on a fairly wide scale in different parts of the country. So both of these things have now been reported fairly widely.
On Wednesday, the education minister also cancelled most end-of-year school exams in war-affected areas. Even before the war broke out, Save the Children ranked Sudan as one of the top 4 countries globally where education was at an extreme risk.
According to estimates, there were close to 7 million children who were out of school before the conflict broke out. And now this number has gone up to close to 9 million children who are in need of education support.
At home in northern Afghanistan, 19-year-old Khushi draws a self-portrait, a figure in a burqa inside a cage. She studied law and political science at Balkh province's main university, until the Taliban banned women from higher education last year. Now Khushi, identified by her last name due to safety concerns, draws to alleviate her depression.
When I realised I'm not mentally well, I got sad. My family got sad as well. I was not happy at all. I was always depressed. I felt like a bird stuck in a cage, one that's lost all her happiness.
The Taliban closed universities to women in December 2022, sparking rare public protests. That followed the closure of most girls' high schools. Encouraged by her family, Khushi started seeing a psychiatrist twice a month. He prescribed art therapy, which Khushi attends 6 days a week. The psychiatrist, unidentified for his security, said since the Taliban took over, he sees 10 or 15 patients a day, up from 4 or 5, and most of them are women. The increase became even more noticeable after the Taliban barred women from universities.
Since the Islamic Emirates started ruling the country, they have imposed so many restrictions on women. They banned them from universities, amusement parks, beauty salons, and so on. They have left nothing for women. Art studios are the only avenue we have left to help our patients. Art studios have become the only place where girls can clear their minds, catch up with old friends, and make new friends. And apart from that, they can learn art too.
Many women in the class were sent by mental health experts. The Taliban say they respect women's rights, in line with their interpretation of Islamic law and Afghan culture. But many women, particularly in urban areas, who gained opportunities in education and work during the 20-year presence of foreign troops and a Western-backed government, are now struggling, Afghan women and mental health experts say. Khushi says the art therapy gives her hope.
Because of this bad situation, I'm a bit disappointed in my life. But I'm not giving up. I will fight. I hope things will get better in the future. They've thrown soup at a Van Gogh painting, glued their hands to roads, blocked traffic, sprayed paint and cut off oil pipes.
What is worth more, art or life?
Thousands of activists across Europe demanding urgent government action against climate change have been met with a crackdown in multiple countries. Lawmakers in Germany, France and Britain are turning up the heat to make actions like this illegal.
We are seeing now extremely worrying developments where activists all over the world are experiencing increased repressions just for fighting for our present and our future.
France and Britain have passed new surveillance and detention laws, with Britain making it illegal to lock or glue yourself to property.
Deputy Speaker, it is, as always...
Activists say they turned to direct action after the failure of other protest strategies.
Deliberately inconveniencing their fellow citizens.
Just Stop Oil activist Indigo Rumbelow.
There is a large crackdown going on across the UK. Some examples of this: two of my friends, they're currently sat in prison. They've been given sentences 3 years and 2 years and 7 months, and the Court of Appeal has rejected their appeal, so they now have to sit in prison for that long time.
Determined to prevent protests from gathering strength, states in Germany and national authorities in France are invoking legal powers often used against organised crime and extremist groups to wiretap and track activists. Police confirmed to Reuters that France has used an anti-terrorism unit to question some climate activists. The governments in Germany and Britain say the response to the protests is aimed at preventing damaging criminal actions. The French government declined to comment for this story, but has previously said the state must be able to combat what it calls radicalisation. Policing data shows that in Berlin alone, more than 4,500 incidents have been registered against the Last Generation and Extinction Rebellion groups, causing police to spend hundreds of thousands of hours on them. German states are also widely using preventative detention to stop people from protesting. In June, police dragged Last Generation activist Simon Lachner from his home without shoes and put him into custody after he publicly announced his plans to protest.
It's important that these are all justified protests, because the disaster situation is this bad, and the threat to all of us as humanity is this enormous. It threatens our lives and all our values that we hold dear. That is why protest, even in this intense and perhaps outlandish way, is entirely justified. And that's what I'm going to plead, and I'm going to bring forward various motions of evidence that show this very catastrophic situation.
Last Generation says all of its activities are transparent and not criminal, and that activists show their faces and names during protests and announce their events in advance. Activist anger has only been fueled by recent heat waves, wildfires and droughts, and the planet recording its hottest ever days in July. They say they're outraged by the lack of any urgent response, and that for historical social change, like winning the vote for women and the US civil rights movement, direct action protests have been crucial.
This is Reuters.